This video is brought to you by Surfshark VPN. Ratchet, for God's sakes, man, if you want to keep the scary robots out of your brain, you should have used the VPN. No, don't ask me how that works. Shut up, I'm reading the promo now.
Nobody messes with me like this.
Anyway, the galaxy isn't the only thing out there filled with spooky things. The internet is swarming with surveillance, web limitation, and data mining up the wazoo, all happening without you even knowing. But with Surfshark VPN, you do have an easy one-for-all solution. And that's across many different products too. Windows, Android, or Apple, with the click of a button, Surfshark turns you into an anonymous and hard-to-track user, giving you more freedom on the internet, keeping you away from prying eyes, and prevents companies from doing things like geo-blocking, where video and streaming services limit your library simply because of where you live. But Surfshark makes all of that a non-issue. Start up the service, choose a location, refresh the page, and there you go, your favorite show that you couldn't watch before, though I wouldn't say no to a 24-hour documentary on Quark's heroic butt cheek. What am I looking at? And those that use the link in the description below and enter the special code Johnny will not only get 83% off their initial order, but the next 3 months are also completely free. As always, thanks to Surfshark VPN for the sponsor, and thank you very much for helping support this channel. Now let's continue on with the show. So the end of my first venture into the Ratchet and Clank series has finally arrived. I'm glad after so long I finally popped my cherry with these games because I ended up really enjoying this ride. Even as the direction and focus veered so hard towards action by the time we got to Deadlock, I wouldn't consider any of these games to be terrible. Going commando to up your arsenal, those are bona fide classics that I now have the pleasure of experiencing myself and could recommend to those wondering if it's worth the time. But after Deadlock was released and as the PlayStation 3 was beginning to make its grand entry, obnoxious price notwithstanding,
$599 US.
Insomniac Games originally wanted to shift focus on making new projects. We can go more into that when I revisit the series for the future lineup. However, the PlayStation Portable was also a thing around this time, and with Insomniac Games preoccupied, and because Sony wanted to give their new handheld some Ratchet and Clank love given its success up to this point, and because the PSP was competing big time against the Nintendo DS and other portable media devices, as they say.
He's really out of it, huh?
Developer High Impact Games was hired to handle the next 2 games instead. High Impact Games, for the record, consisted of former members of Insomniac Games and Naughty Dog, so at the very least, if you're going to have a different team work on a beloved series, it's good that it's in the hands of people that have been there since the beginning. Maybe that's why Ratchet's back to his original look from the first game. Use what you know. I might be misremembering a bit, but was his head always that large? He looks more like someone wearing a Ratchet fursuit than the genuine article.
ユウタさんすごいっす。やだな、こんなのいらないよ。本当に困るな、まいっちゃ。よし、任せな。やったっす。ラチェットやったっす。
But because folks were more likely to have a PlayStation 2 than a PlayStation Portable, both Size Matters and Secret Agent Clank were given a second life on the PS2 with a few tweaks. And that is nothing new. There's been several cases where, despite healthy sales in the handheld, Sony would request that PlayStation 2 versions of certain games be made to milk the fans for everything they got, maybe. Apparently both of these games, though, saw release on the PlayStation 2 due to high fan demand, so maybe it's not just about money sometimes, but keeping your consumers happy. So then it became a matter of which version was I going to look at for these videos. Judging by your responses and recommendations, it didn't make that very clear at all. I had people tell me, oh dude, play the original PSP release, the PS2 versions are so bad. But I also had plenty of people on the other side tell me the exact opposite. A Ratchet and Clank tug of war, you could say, so who do I believe? Let's come out of my pocket anyway. So I originally had the intent of looking at the PlayStation Portable versions for this video. These were originally handheld games, so I wanted to play them in the proper context. But that sure as shit didn't last long. I couldn't stomach more than half an hour of Size Matters on the PSP. I just want to say now the game looks and sounds great. Kudos to High Impact Games for making it look as good as it did without too much compromise. It looks like a standard Ratchet and Clank game, but the fundamental issues were apparent from minute 1. The camera was way too close to Ratchet for my liking, and on the PSP the only camera control you got are on the shoulder buttons.
Press the L button and R button at the same time to crouch.
You can set the camera to always follow Ratchet from behind to help circumvent the rigid turning, but this has the consequence of making Ratchet's movement feel more sluggish. Turning now feels very loose. Movement and strafing were separated in this too. I wasn't too surprised by this, seeing as the PSP only had one analog stick, but it was weird having to use the D-pad for basic third-person movement and having to use the analog stick to strafe, and that was after setting the strafing controls to the analog stick, because by default, I think it's like old school Ratchet and Clank where you had to hold one of the shoulder buttons down before you could begin strafing at all. Again, not that big of a deal, but muscle memory from my previous ventures and how fundamentally clunky this felt made it very difficult for me to adjust. Too difficult, in fact, which is why I switched over to the PlayStation 2 version, so that I could at least have camera controls closer to the original game. Lock strafe mode is sadly absent from this altogether, so I gotta play the game how I did in Ratchet and Clank 1 and 2. At the very least, the game's auto lock was reliable enough, so accuracy with weapons was never a concern. Now, something we have to keep in mind throughout this video is that both this and Secret Agent Clank were originally PSP games. I know that goes without saying, bear with me. They were titles made for a handheld that didn't pack as much memory or rock similar horsepower as everyone's beloved home console, though the PSP was certainly no slouch in the processing department. But bottom line, both games don't look as good as any of the PS2 games, the frame rate has been cut in half, and the amount of content doesn't compare. These, for lack of a better description, are budget games made to fill the time, which did not change when both were brought to the PlayStation 2 proper. I want to stress this is not an excuse for the problems these games suffer from, and you can be sure as shit these games have their fucking problems. And yes, you can make the argument that extra time and effort could have been placed to make them the same quality as the other Ratchet and Clank games everyone knows and loves, but I don't think that was ever in the cards, even after giving them a second release. I'm heading into these games safely assuming that they're not going to be on the same caliber as at least Going Command or Up Your Arsenal, because from my experience, it's rare that a handheld entry matches the quality of games that up until this point were mainly released on consoles. Metal Gear is a good example, I think. Ghost Babel on the Game Boy Color was okay. I didn't really care for the Acid series. Peace Walker was a good time, but I still wouldn't play that over MGS 1, 2, 3, or 4. So with all that said, let's dive into the short-lived PlayStation Portable era of the Ratchet and Clank series, starting with Ratchet and Clank Size Matters. Ratchet and Clank are taking some time off relaxing on the beach when a small child named Luna wanted to take pictures for a school report on Heroes, requests that Ratchet show off his skills so that she can see firsthand what it looks like to see a hero in action. Ratchet is all too happy to oblige, but soon after, Luna is suddenly kidnapped by robots and whisked away, dropping an artifact that Clank believes belongs to the ancient Technomites, giving them an idea on Luna's captors. Ratchet, on the other hand, being a Technomite atheist, you could say, doesn't even believe they really exist, but it's all moot as Ratchet just wants to save the girl in the end anyway. So Ratchet and Clank set off to rescue Luna and stop the Technomites, but it's revealed to be a ruse, as Luna is actually a robot constructed by the Technomites, all in an effort to lure Ratchet to their base so that they can extract his DNA and clone him to form the ultimate army that the leader of the Technomites, Auto-Destruct, will then use to rule the galaxy and then absorb the knowledge of all of its inhabitants to become all-powerful and all-knowing. You know, like how the Riddler handled things in Batman Forever. There's what I immediately thought of. Ratchet, by the way, does not take kindly to the idea of being used and cloned, and I thought for a second, holy shit, this is the game where Ratchet goes to the dark side like Jack did in Jak 2, because Ratchet is so pissed that he was experimenting on that you think they killed his parents or some other shit. It changed the tone of the narrative so hard and fast, my dude is fuming.
Nobody messes with me like this.
But that's all there really is to the story. Ratchet and Clank stopping Auto and the Technomites, so even with the sudden shift in tone, the plot's substance is as deep as a rain puddle. Oh, right, there is this subplot concerning Captain Quark trying to locate his real parents, but this shit is so secondary that I forgot it was even a thing. Firstly, Quark is in the opening bit of the game, and after the second planet, he just fucking vanishes until the end, which upon returning, I was like, right, you did say you were looking for your folks, but Christ, that was so long ago. Quark's probably got some contractual appearances to fulfill, and boy howdy does his inclusion here feel so obligatory.
Quark?
Clank! What a coincidence! What are you doing here?
I am trailing Ratchet and Clank to see what they are doing, so I can join in on their next adventure.
Hey, that's what I'm doing! No, wait, I mean,
At least the humor is still on point. I'm glad to say that size matters for how thin the narrative is. Still delivered on the laughs that itself isn't as prevalent as before, but the effort's still there and I welcome it.
Any robots found there without being on fire will be set on fire, then fired.
I can't say I'm shocked at the smaller story given the game's smaller nature. It's shorter than Deadlocked. I think I clocked in about 4 to 5 hours. It fits with the nature of the game, and they do play around with that, albeit somewhat inconsistently. It's a game for a smaller device. The subtitle is Size Matters. Ratchet and Clank have a device that lets them shrink down to infiltrate different planets and security devices. It's all part of the theme. But smaller isn't exactly the word I would use. Lesser, I feel, would be more appropriate. Size Matters to me is a lesser Ratchet and Clank. With a couple of exceptions, everything here has been done better in other games. Shit, I would even say the first game did some things better here. If we want to start at the absolute bottom, the camera work is so fucking trash in this. In every recording session, I ran into some degree of camera hiccups. I'm talking obscured views leaving everything to my imagination. This happens a lot, I cannot stress that enough. Sometimes it got too close to Ratchet in the middle of combat. Some of the given angles straight up obscuring bottomless pits. That especially got under my skin. And this is the PS2 version where I'm actually allowed to tilt the camera up and down. I can't imagine how infuriating this would have been on the PSP. I can't say if this happens on both versions, but on the PS2, a few technical issues reared their ugly head too. Nothing game breaking, it just left me feeling awkward. There's a boss sequence against Luna, and it starts with Ratchet getting chased in a cornfield as Luna tries to mow him down in the biplane. I gotta say, that's a very odd time for a North by Northwest reference if that was their intention. But sometimes, when you die, the music would just cut out. And now you're doing this intense chase sequence to the sound of nothing. Now this is some fucked up ASMR. So I already touched on the control issues earlier. The PlayStation 2 version does mitigate that by giving us more real estate on the controller. I got no problems controlling Ratchet or Clank in this. They move fine, they jump fine. The jump hovering is almost obnoxiously slow. This definitely could have been sped up. Jesus Christ. Speaking of hovering, the hoverboard racing. Shit sucks. There's no grace in your movement. It feels very knee-jerk, snapping hard left or right with even the slightest touch of the D-pad or analog stick, making it extra cumbersome to stay in your lane. I didn't mind the actual hovering feature where you can basically fly for a short amount of time with no real restrictions. With enough fuel pickups, you can turn the tide so fast in this, which I managed to do in the last mandatory race. I fucked up so much in this run, collided with so many walls, fell down so many pits, and somehow, some way, I still managed to come out on top thanks to the hovering ability, though the AI being absolutely brain dead is also a major contributor too. A victory so undeserved, but you take those wins anyway. But I did not bother with the extra challenges for both because I hated these that much. Nope, control felt like ass, only gonna do the bare minimum and move on. And thankfully I can get away with that as progression isn't locked behind any paywalls and such. And I felt a little bad about skipping the side missions because normally I like to do some of the extra work so that I can amass the extra bolts so that I can purchase other weapons as soon as I can, so that I can also level them up as soon as I can. This game's weapons though, what the fuck? They are so weak! Even after upgrading some of them to max, it takes so many fucking shots just to bring even the basic ass goons down. The shotgun, what happened here? These guys should be long dead, but it takes like 7 to 8 shots at point blank to even lay a dent on them. I only used like 3 weapons consistently through the whole game because of this wacky ass damage output. The starting pistols, because they had the most ammo, the shotgun, because I was in denial, and the rocket launcher, which was like the only way I managed to take out the final boss because this dude's a goddamn HP sponge otherwise, on par with the giant robot and going commando, and he has instant kill attacks. God. And Clank doesn't fare much better, although he doesn't fare much at all. He's got the basic Clank sections from before, guiding drones here and there, solving a few easy puzzles. Not as engaging as previously, and nothing we haven't seen before. Some of the extra challenges have you playing Lemmings with the drones, but never really considered myself a Lemmings expert, so didn't play much of this. He's also got this incredibly random BattleBot section. In the middle of his search for Ratchet, he's just thrown into a BattleBots game, no tutorial, but doesn't ask for much, just ramming the shit. Robot Wars and BattleBots was more of an early 2000s thing, wasn't it? I think they might have missed the mark on this inclusion, but just a couple of years. On a more positive note, I like the space battles with Giant Clank. It's pretty hard to mess up classic Star Fox, and that's what these reminded me of, seeing as you're flying in a linear pathway, unlike the free-roaming space battles you did in the other games. It's nothing to write home about, as is a lot of things in this game, if you couldn't tell by now. You just spam lasers and rockets until the stage ends, but it's harmless. Secret Agent Clank will bring these back almost wholesale, so I think the devs like these a lot too, or they just need to save a buck, I don't know. The grind lock minigame when you're unlocking certain doors was fine, it's just standard rail grinding, but I'd take this over shifting lasers or the stuff that Going Commando wanted me to do. And it's better than the puzzle game Secret Agent Clank has you do. It's like baby's first puzzle league, Puyo Puyo, or match 3 or 2, but you know, it's not my cup of tea. I also enjoyed Ratchet's armor system to some extent. So as you're playing the game, you'll start collecting armor armor pieces. Very Mega Man X, that's what I thought of anyway. You get added defense for each piece, but if you manage to collect all 4 pieces of a set, you not only get great defense, but an added perk like a fire effect added to your melee attacks. Honestly, I thought this was a cool idea. But this was kind of a double-edged sword for me, because after I completed my first armor set, I really didn't want to switch to any other armor piece until I completed another set. So what this meant is that I stuck with the fire armor longer than what was probably intended, and midway through, enemies were just ripping my asshole apart. So I bit the bullet and just started throwing armor pieces on just to get my defense up, which also meant I was no longer getting any additional side effects. Though I did learn that there are hidden combinations of different pieces that grant different perks, but I only learned about that after the fact, so maybe I'll take advantage of that during my next playthrough sometime later this century. Honestly, I think what saves Size Matters from being a straight up bad time from beginning to end is that the game isn't long enough for any of my gripes to really seep in and ruin my whole experience, but the experience was still forgettable and mundane. Like, I didn't even mention how the game made stuff like the swing shot a separate tool again, and it was a little annoying having to switch stuff out like before, or the very specific watering can. It's what it is. You only really use these for plants and nothing else. Okay. The titanium bolts, I found a couple of these, never found out what they were used for, didn't really care enough to find out afterwards. If I wasn't playing this for a video, I probably would have stopped playing earlier just because of the camera shenanigans and weaker gunplay. They are so weak in this game. But before you know it, your runtime of the current world is over and you're off to the next planet. Nothing in this game stuck out as amazing to me. Most worlds were inoffensive. Oh, never mind that shit. Here comes Mungo! The only other sequence that immediately comes to mind was the mindfuck when Ratchet was unconscious. Now this was fun in a trippy way, loved the low quality JPEGs of classic Ratchet and Clank villains just floating around, but I did like this place. That's it though. Lesser Ratchet and Clank. On PSP or PS2, can't really recommend this one. You got your underwhelming and your overwhelming games. Size Matters left me whelmed. As the saying goes, it's not the size that counts, it's how you use it. I don't think Size Matters uses it very well. Look at that, it's even got Clank yawning. So Secret Agent Clank doesn't do things much better, but I did end up liking it a little more than Size Matters. But Ratchet finds himself locked in jail after being accused of stealing the Eye of Infinity, a precious gem. Believing that Ratchet is innocent though, Clank dons his secret agent attire and begins his mission to clear Ratchet's name and discover who's really behind the disappearance of the Eye of Infinity, traveling to different planets and dealing with all manner of criminals, small or otherwise. So I thought the whole Secret Agent Clank thing was just a television show within the game's world, so is Clank actually a secret agent in real life, or is the game taking place within the show itself? Just some food for thought. The real culprit ends up being Clunk, Clank's robotic doppelganger from Up Your Arsenal, now rocking the evil twin goatee to boot. But after some slick kung fu maneuvers, Clank saves the day and clears Ratchet's name. This whole thing is a ginormous James Bond spoof, from Clank's attire, the gadgets he can use to complete missions, and the many femme fatales that are as sexy as they are dangerous. This one's got some massive fucking knockers though. You know, whoever oversaw modeling this one was likely having the time of their life. Now, I'm someone who's consumed more Bond parodies than actual Bond films through his life, if you can believe it. I've only seen a handful, none of them recent either. So every gag, visual or otherwise, is something I've seen mocked so many other times, nothing I haven't seen already done in other spoofs. So the game didn't really make me laugh a whole bunch. A few smiles here and there. I liked how when Clank found weapons to send to Ratchet in prison, he just puts candles on the gun to make it look like a cake. Works every time too. There's yet again a subplot involving Captain Quirk as he travels around the galaxy feeding this dude a whole bunch of bullshit to sell his upcoming memoirs. It only really ties into the main plot at the end, but you know what? I didn't mind these from a writing standpoint because this is something up Quirk's alley. It makes sense for the guy to do something like this, unlike the parental stuff from Size Matters, and it does lead to some of the game's best jokes, the opera scene being the highlight. Not every day where I see a progression meter tied to someone's ass cheek.
I swam right under it and plugged the leak with just my left butt cheek.
Heading into this game, I was expecting it to be nothing more than an extension of Clank's drone-based puzzle-solving antics from the console games. And while his drones have some significance here, fulfilling their duties as expected, even doing new things like pole swinging and handling electric currents, Secret Agent Clank is primarily a stealth game. I even mentioned Metal Gear earlier too, that's fitting. You sneak around trying to avoid direct contact with enemies, laser traps, and whatever else that might wreck your day. Though Clank isn't totally helpless, on the contrary, he gets access to several gadgets that can not only disable certain booby traps, but can also help in dealing with hired goons and security guards. Bow tie shurikens, hologram fisticuffs, vicious plants with an appetite for metal, an umbrella that gives things a good electric shock. This one ended up being my favorite just because of its high damage output. And like in traditional Ratchet and Clank, these gadgets and such will upgrade with use, so while stealth is encouraged, I mean you even get bonus experience for managing to completely avoid combat in each area, there is nothing stopping you from considering a more direct approach. And sometimes you don't even need to use weapons for that. If you can get behind someone unnoticed, you can perform a stealth takedown with just a few simple button presses. I'd rather not have to do something like this each time. I'd rather the takedown just be one and done, like a Metal Gear Solid neck snap or Batman silent takedown. But this isn't all that bad. It does get a little repetitive though. I wish Clank had more options available in physical combat, because seeing him do the same 1, 2, 3 and stealth takedowns loses its appeal after a while. But like James Bond, gameplay will get a little more high stakes. Okay, so I have to say again, never watched a whole bunch of James Bond, but I'm guessing these rhythm game sections are a reference to Bond playing DDR at some point in one movie, maybe Parappa the Rapper? Either way, it's a rhythm game. You just hit the buttons asked in proper order, but I don't know if this was just an issue in the PS2 version, but these notes are in no fucking way timed properly with the background music. I'm not kidding when I say I had to mute the volume so I wouldn't get distracted by how out of sync the music was to the beat. The ballroom dance section even suffered from slowdown mid-song, and that's like the one thing you don't want to experience in any rhythm game. Slowdown changes the timing, lag eats inputs, and these are games that require precise inputs, come on. Other times you'll find yourself getting hounded by goons in vehicle sections, through steep slopes high in the mountains to poisonous sewers in your trusty car. These are okay. I found it cathartic to smack guys left and right and watch them eat shit. I also laughed how the guys in the snow level said "wee" when we all jumped off the cliffside. But for those itching for something more traditional, there's not much here, but Ratchet does get a few dedicated bits as he bides his time in prison. It's essentially the arena challenges from going commando and up your arsenal, but that's it. There's no platforming and all that other jazz. On the plus side, the damage output seems to be back to normal, and they brought back the lock strafe control, so already I'm feeling more at ease here. But it's just Ratchet against a bunch of prison inmates, so it isn't as visually stimulating as one might expect. They even added sensor bars on the naked inmates, the fucking cowards. Captain Quirk also gets a few sections as he retells his tales of bullshit heroism to this poor sap, who doesn't buy any of this shit but secretly works for Clunk, so he's gotta bear with it for the time. Anyway, these aren't anything special. They have some charm, as Quirk's narration repeatedly changes the circumstance of the situation as he keeps talking, and I really like that. Again, the visual humor in these sections are some of the best jokes in the game, but the gameplay is very one-note and repetitive. You either blast things with your meager gun or awkwardly punch things until the stage ends, which takes fucking forever. Holy shit, this is the biggest problem I have with this game. It is fundamentally solid. The core gameplay itself is fine, but there are so many sections in this game that go on for too fucking long, and it ruins what's otherwise a perfectly playable game. There's this bit in the casino, right? Torturous. The rhythm game during poker, I was initially enjoying this sequence, loving how more nonsensical the game became with the random trivia questions and all that, but then you gotta control the drones for a bit to stop the others from cheating, and then you're back to the rhythm game for a bit, and then you're back to the drones again. It just kept on going when this joke should have ended like 10 minutes ago. The opera bit with Quirk. I love the dedication to the presentation with Quirk even singing his own opera tune, but it overstays its welcome. Just when you think the show is over, watching the curtains fall for what feels like the 5th fucking time, nope, the curtains are rising yet again, holy shit, this is still going! Most of the vehicle sections are too long. The stealth bits with the hologram disguises are too long. The last few drone sections with the switch flicking and the pole swinging are too long. My god, the Mexican standoff with Quirk and the aliens takes so fucking long. Preventing Mexican aliens from destroying a wall, that is like milk. But this game's problem with stretching simple gameplay to their logical limits is what killed my enjoyment of Secret Agent Clank. What turned the game from honest to god enjoyable to please god make it stop. And that kills me because I was enjoying this more than size matters. I didn't run into nearly as many technical issues as I did in the last game, bearing the one time I got stuck inside the box, which for some reason hitting the select button got me out of. The fuck was that about? Clank may not get all the explosive toys that Ratchet gets to rock in other games, but the style of progression, the platforming, the things you can do with your secret agent gadgets, there was so much potential there, but too many times it bogs itself down with these overly long segments that just sucked the fucking life out of me, and I grew so tired and ambivalent, and outside of a game being pure garbage, that is the worst feeling a game could leave on me. Ugh, once I got to the end, there was just a big meh. That was a game. Size Matters and Secret Agent Clank are games. I was hoping we wouldn't end things on a collective meh, but I guess that's on me for deciding to end this marathon with PlayStation Portable spin-offs. Well, when I return to the series, we are jumping to the PlayStation 3 and starting the Future lineup. They all have Future in their names, is why I call it that. I don't know when I'll be back to Ratchet and Clank, but if these games are anything to go by with how much I've enjoyed myself, I'm feeling pretty optimistic about things. But as long as they continue to deliver the laughs, the good times, the explosions, I'm solid. But as always, thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Stay safe out there, look out for each other, have yourselves a fantastic night, and take care.